Hi, good afternoon. My name is Michelle D'Amico, and I'm the Director of Continuing Education and Public Programs at the NYU SPS Center for Global Affairs, or CGA. I'm delighted to welcome you to today's conversation, offered in collaboration with Aperio Philanthropy. We began this series with Aperio early during the COVID pandemic to help address the timely and critical topics confronting frontline fundraisers. Since then, we've offered 2 to 3 conversations per semester and encourage you to explore these in-depth conversations from those events via our respective YouTube pages. And now I'd like to share a little bit about the Center for Global Affairs. Since its founding, our goal at the Center for Global Affairs has been to prepare global citizens to make a positive impact in the world. We do this through a variety of activities, including our 2 graduate programs, one in global affairs and an MS in global security, conflict, and cybercrime. We also offer a wide variety of skills and knowledge-based continuing education courses and offer public events such as this that expand upon the critical topics covered in our classrooms. We are also very proud to be home to the George H. Heyman Jr. Program for Fundraising and Philanthropy. Through our open enrollment courses, on-site intensives, and certificate in fundraising, we offer professionally oriented educational opportunities for those looking to enter or grow within the fundraising field. Courses are taught by practitioner faculty who bring their vast experience, expertise, and networks to the classroom. We'll send out additional information about our programs and past events following today's conversation, so please feel free to reach out with any questions you might have. I'd also like to remind all of our participants that we do have some time reserved at the end of the conversation for Q&A from the audience, so please use the Q&A tool. Now I'm delighted to introduce today's moderator and event partner, who is also an alumna of our graduate program. Bianca Durrani is the president and CEO of Aperio Philanthropy. Bianca founded Aperio Philanthropy to simplify revenue growth for nonprofits. Since 2018, Bianca and her team have supported more than 180 organizations nationwide, providing hands-on support for campaigns, major gifts, and development operations. Prior to founding Aperio, Bianca served in the philanthropy capacity building roles at organizations such as the American Red Cross and the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. And now, without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Bianca for today's discussion.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to all of you who have taken time out of your day for this important conversation. Um, this moment feels really heavy to me as a leader and a fundraiser. And in all the conversations I've been having with folks in the field, like the panel we're going to hear from today, I'm hearing that we're wrestling as a community with how we show up, how we lean in, how we be there for our communities in this moment, and also how we do that in a way that is authentic to us as fundraisers and community leaders. In a tense election season like we're in, divisions feel so sharp on so many levels, and leaders are grappling with a question of how do we use our influence to bring people back together? And really specifically, as fundraisers who are the face of our organizations in the field, what role can we play to build relationships and to tell stories and to deepen connection? This panel today will look at how nonprofits can step up as community leaders to bridge divisions, the special roles that fundraisers can play in this work, storytelling strategies that build understanding, empathy, and connection, and techniques for having difficult conversations. Before we dive in, it's my pleasure to introduce this distinguished panel. David Cheney is the Capital Campaign Director for Houston Food Bank. As an executive with nearly 30 years of nonprofit and public sector experience, David's mission in the long term is to influence public opinion and create social, societal change using leadership and senior management skills. Jamie Dillon is the Senior Director of Advancement at Issue One. Jamie joined Issue One in September 2022 with over 10 years of experience in nonprofit fundraising. She specializes in institutional giving and donor engagement. At Issue One, she works closely with donors, partners, and supporters to build momentum for bipartisan reform, advancing efforts to create a more inclusive and representative democracy. Prior to Issue One, Jamie served as the Director of Institutional Giving at MICVA Challenge, which is a national nonpartisan nonprofit dedicated to developing the next generation of civic leaders and engaged citizens. John Donahue is the managing director of the development department at the Brennan Center. John manages a growing major gifts portfolio, working with organizations' leadership to catalyze deepened partnerships with donors in support of the center's ambitious fundraising and programmatic goals. He also contributes to cross-organizational and special initiatives, such as the center's 20th anniversary campaign that raised nearly $10 million in endowment and reserve funds. And last but not least, Michael Guerra is Chief Sustainability Officer at the San Antonio Food Bank. With a head start in pastoral ministry and education, Michael has spent most of the last 2 decades in food bank executive management. Since joining the San Antonio Food Bank in 2011, Michael has led and managed work and teams that brought an incredible $2 billion in food and funds to set the tables of those at risk for hunger in Southwest Texas. Thank you to all of you for being here and for your willingness to lead this conversation. To set the stage, I want to hear from each of you about a little bit about your lens and story and background that you're bringing to the conversation. So let's just do a little round robin, maybe starting with Michael. Tell us about the perspective you're bringing to today's conversation.
Well, Bianca, thank you. It is great to see you. And thanks everybody for participating in this. Super important. And I think, the lens for me, you heard Bianca talk a little bit about my background. I spent the better part of my life really trying to delve into areas of spirituality and separating that out from religion or interreligious practice, but really the belief that we all have a self and a spirit that has wisdom in it. And we see this across all religious traditions. Also spent time in grad school in New York. We were talking earlier about NYU at Fordham University, where I did my master's PhD in sociology. And so kind of the intersection of spirit, of social thinking and how groups organize. And then 20 years of nonprofit work within the sector of food banking and 30 years overall in the sector, just in fundraising. And so all that kind of coalesces around for me in a special way when it comes to this topic. I'm also a dad, a grandfather. I'm a team member. I have colleagues, and it's in all of those spaces with my neighbors, with my family, and these big macro situations where I think, the challenge of our discourse these days. I think about language a lot, Bianca. I write in some local stuff in San Antonio, so language and writing, language and just interpersonal communication, friend to friend communication through Zoom, how we use words, how our body language speaks. I think we're being driven and taken to a place, maybe in the national discourse, that's maybe not where we want to go as philanthropy team leads, and how we can take our own unique being and our own backgrounds and experiences, and kind of create maybe a different true north for everybody. So if that makes sense, that's probably the framework that I'm operating out of.
Thank you, Michael. What about you, Jamie?
Thanks, Michael, for starting us off with that. And I feel very similarly as you. I know Bianca mentioned the election is coming, and I'm one of those people that has a countdown clock on my computer and on my cell phone. It's actually 11 days away. So that's sitting really heavily with me and with my current organization. And I work for a bipartisan national democracy reform organization right now. But I previously served with a youth civic engagement organization. So I've been in the democracy space for some time. And my largest reflection is for the past 6 years, every election I've had, I've written to donors, this is the most important election of our lifetime. This is the most important election. And it's tiring, and there's a point where it doesn't feel authentic anymore and we're all burned out. So that's the lens that I'm writing from. We all feel this tension and disconnect in our communities and in our politics. But at the same point, as a nonprofit leader and someone that really believes in the sector, I think this conversation is important because nonprofits can be the change. We are those social connectors and innovators. We bridge divides, we bring people together, we feed people, we give new ideas. So I think that's where I'm sitting with, and I would love to, share that how we can be better leaders in this space when nonprofits will be the leaders that this country needs in this moment.
Well said. Thank you, Jamie. John, what about you? As someone else who works in the democracy space, I imagine you've also told a few people it's the most important election of our lives.
Yeah, and it's true, but it's been true as well. I have been very fortunate to have spent 12 years at the Brennan Center for Justice. And when I started here, the issues that we worked on, they might be divisive to some people, but they were not as divisive as they are now. And so seeing that transformation that has happened in the work, but also within our own country and our political system has been really alarming, and it's given us a lot of work to do. And so, similarly to Jamie, I think that every nonprofit is a democracy organization, even if that's not in your mission. Nonprofits are the community ambassadors who are going out there and they're having tough conversations. They're bringing people together. They're working to better the conditions in their communities. And so I'm really excited to share a little bit about what we do at the Brennan Center to do that, but also to hear and learn from others about what they found effective and help them to bridge those divides.
Thanks, John. David?
Well, again, thank you for including me on this wonderful panel. From my lens, we're talking about 30 plus years of experience in the nonprofit, national and international program arena in program management and mostly in fundraising. And, from my perspective today, I'm so grateful to be a part of this because I think just speaking for a lot of nonprofits, fundraising in general is getting harder. And it forces us to become more creative in our thinking and our approach and how we're engaging donors and how we're engaging the community. And for me, in the past 6 months, being in the capital campaign director role at the Houston Food Bank, from the sense of hunger, this isn't about people who are unemployed. This is about hardworking individuals and families who are struggling to get by. And, so hunger isn't about food, it's about income. It's about creating those sustainability opportunities to help them improve the quality of their lives. And so I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to share today from my lens in that way.
Well, thank you all. I love the diverse perspectives, but also the level of care you all bring to this conversation. As Michelle said, I am an alum of the Center for Global Affairs, and one of the things I studied while I was there and I'm very passionate about is the role of civil society, or this third sector between government and the private sector, in creating change and shaping societies. And I know we're going to get into some tactical ideas and fundraising and storytelling, but the place I'd like to start is by asking you, Michael, as someone who reflects on this a lot, to zoom out and tell us a little bit about how you describe the role of nonprofits in our society, and what do you see as that art of the art of possible, that potential for leadership in a moment like this? You are on mute. Someone got that on their bingo.
Boom. Thank you. It was a super thoughtful question, Bianca. And I've been, you sent this to us a couple of days ago. I've been thinking about it a lot. And, for all of us in the nonprofit sector, I mean, we're businesses that are for, a donor a tax break, right? And in some ways, we can operate just like other businesses with that being our only differentiator. But we know it's not. We know we have a social mandate as well that kind of comes with that. And I think for me, part of the answer is in, the name of your company. It's Aperio Philanthropy, and we unpack philanthropy. All right, it's about love for humankind. And to me, that's the place where I start. What's the role of the nonprofit sector in all of this? It's a little bit of our place to put love first, and I don't want that to sound soft at all, because it's, as we know, in reality and in practice, in our families and neighborhoods and in our discourse, it can be very challenging. So it's a little bit of the values ranking, right? I mean, we all have a bottom line as businesses to take care of. We have employees that we want to care for. But I think as nonprofits, we have a unique ability to rank our values differently. And, it's like putting compassion ahead of capital, putting sustainability ahead of speed, putting people ahead of profit. And again, not that those others aren't important, but they just might be in a different value ranking when it comes to what the nonprofit can bring to the community. When I'm in my judgy kind of cynical way, I would say that probably many of the nonprofits, most, just like the faith community, which I worked for years and years, we're just as co-opted and have capitulated to capitalism as everybody else. And I think there's a real need for reform from within our nonprofit sector to take seriously, I mean, like really radically seriously, um, a framework that looks different than the rest of capitalist society. And so, then when it comes to then kind of pulling back a little bit more, I think, the leadership opportunities within our nonprofits, um, certainly there's this kind of thought about servant leadership, but, thinking about our natural resources and about sustainability in a way that maybe other businesses can't or don't, I think is kind of the other part of that. It's a bit of love of people and a love of those natural resources, because we know without that, we're all tied to earth, we're all tied to the water, we're all tied to the air, we're of it together, and we need it together, but we don't necessarily care for it together. And so I think the nonprofits as a sector have an opportunity to put that dramatically toward the top of their priority list as well. Hope that makes sense.
Really well said. And I think, one of the big observations I've had working with nonprofits in the last few years is that we are undergoing a little bit of an identity existential crisis as a sector, because I think a lot of traditional charities were created to be nice and take care of people. And now, in a world where there's so much work to do to create a place where people can live the lives they want to lead, nonprofits are really becoming the tip of the spear for change and for healing and for this coming together like you're describing. And I think that there is been this reawakening and broadening of purpose in nonprofits that we can really tap into in this moment as a representative of the people, and the people are where the change really comes from. So speaking of Jamie and John, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions because your organizations are probably most obviously and directly impacted by the next 11 days, which Jamie, I'm also counting down because my birthday is on election day. So double countdown. But how are you thinking about the role of your organization in this moment, and in particularly your role as a fundraiser? Maybe we'll start with you, John, and then hear from Jamie.
Sure. Thank you for that question. And happy early birthday. I hope you have lots to celebrate. At the Brennan Center, we have sort of a three-part model, we say, that starts as a think tank doing research, and then moving into policy development advocacy, and finally into communications, mobilization, public education. And I think this year, with all the mis and disinformation that is swirling around and really fueling lots of chaos, the first piece feels very, very important. The trusted facts, information that people can rely on and feel confident in, that they can use to further their own missions or address needs in their own communities. And so this year, that's looked like all kinds of things, like doing extensive polling to figure out which messages work best to convince people that the election is secure and that they can have confidence that their vote is going to count. And so that has been something that we've been spending a lot of time working on this year. The people we're trying to reach, they come from all different parts of society. So it could be a lawmaker, it could be an election official who needs help, it could be a litigator who's trying to bring a civil rights lawsuit, or it could just be, a voter who wants to know what the rules are and how they can make sure that their voice is going to be heard. I think drawing on that, as a fundraiser, my role is to sort of build those relationships so that people can trust us and know that the work that we're doing is having an impact, that we're being good stewards of the resources that they've entrusted to us, and that we're actually not contributing to the problems that we're trying to address. And so that means being very careful about the ways that we communicate. I think in the fundraising field, there is often a convenience to being doom and gloom, to using the crises as fodder for appeals and all of that. And I think, of course, there is room for that in the space, but that really people are looking for hope, and they're looking for inspiration, and they're looking to know that what we're doing and what they're helping us can do can make a difference. I had a donor who told me that once they learned that the vast majority of the election officials and workers around this country are honest, hardworking people who want to do right by their communities and want to ensure that people are heard, that really changed their perspective on the issue. They thought it was this big, intractable issue that they were not going to be able to make any dent in. And so, really convincing people that there are lots of rays of sunlight if you look hard enough, in an otherwise pretty discouraging environment, has been a big part of what I think my role as a fundraiser for the Brennan Center has been this year.
John, I love that, and very similarly feel that we do have to have a message of hope at this time. And I know in terms of the resources that the Brennan Center is putting out, as issue one, we're also doing bipartisan election protection messages to broad swaths of the American electorate. I was gonna say we do use your resources all the time, so thank you. Um, Fantastic work that you're doing, and I think from our perspective as an organization, I think, and my perspective as a fundraiser, I would say, is we're also tackling these issues from a high level. So again, for issue one, we work on election protection, tech reform, and congressional modernization, really big ideas. But I think what I have been reminding our donors and supporters and partners is this isn't just about the next 11 days. It's about the next Congress. It's about years from now. We have to move our democracy forward, no matter what happens in this election. And that does require collaboration and working across the aisle. And so I've been trying to connect with folks, and when I talk about folks, I'm people with different political persuasions, Democrats, Republicans, independents, and really unite us. And one of the things that I think we're also, as an organization, putting forward is the idea of democracy over party and putting country over party. We have that very sweet, pithy call to action. Um, it's a joy and it's a privilege to work with people who really feel that need. And then, like, I think as a fundraiser, to harness that energy and excitement into something positive with your organization is a real joy. And I think that's where I try and center myself in these next few weeks and months ahead, because it really is easier when you bring your donors and supporters and community along with you.
Thank you both, and the through line you're both pulling out is that people give because it feels good and because it feels like in the face of this behemoth, challenging, overwhelming set of circumstances that we can do something, we could be part of a solution. We don't have to just sit there and be passive people experiencing the world. We could be part of creating the world that we want to live in. We often see in these big inflection moments, whether it's a natural disaster or obviously during COVID, we saw this after the murder of George Floyd, that people respond with this outpouring of donating, of supporting causes that are working on the issues they care about. So as organizations that are at sort of at the front lines, or are certainly connected to organizations that are, how are you thinking about this opportunity to meet the moment and not just catch funds that may come your way, but really start to engage and retain donors and broaden this coalition of people who care about the kind of world that you're trying to build? Maybe Jamie, you can start off this time, and John can build on your answer.
Sure. And I think, Bianca, my first thought is it's so, number one, it's so great to see people care, right? It's thrilling to see new donors. It's thrilling to see the momentum of these ideas that we care so deeply about in our mission. But sort of as you alluded to, and every fundraiser on this call knows it's so hard to retain donors that give out of crisis. So I think this is a really important question for us to dive into. And I think the way that I've been thinking about it is I've been thinking about fundraising as very aligned with movement building. We want people not just to see the impact of their gift. And so when I talk about that, I'm talking about the usual stewardship activities, send them their thank you, keep them updated, show them the impact of their work. So at issue one, I'm, sending reports and showing ads to donors that they've helped us play in battleground states right now. But I think the bigger part of it for me is making them feel that they are part of this with us. And so it's placing the national dialogue, our work into the national dialogue in a way that shows us as the change agent and brings them in as part of a community with us. So, um, for example, we're doing two things at the moment. We're doing weekly election protection calls. And instead of just talking about our work, we have donors from across the country, all ages, all expertise, who get on and also share what they're doing for the election. And they're learning from us and we're learning from them. So that kind of a call is really, it's community building. And I think people feel part of the work with us. And then I think the other thing too is, one of the most extraordinary things I find about issue one is instead of signing off with typical email signatures like in gratitude or best, we always sign off with onwards. And it's because people want to feel like we're doing something together and we're moving forward. And it's these kinds of tools and techniques to build community, I think are really important that we all think about that for our organizations. How can you bring people along with you? There's nothing more powerful than a movement. And so it's really special to share that feeling with donors and supporters.
I love all that you just shared, Jamie, and that call sounds like a really feel-good moment in a otherwise really tough time. At the Brennan Center, it certainly has been our experience that there have been a lot of new donors in the space for the better part of the last decade. Some of them big donors, lots of them not. And so what's been really exciting and rewarding to be a fundraiser at this organization is being in a position to help these donors understand the issues in the field and the broader ecosystem within which we operate. I think we all know that people for a long time have taken democracy for granted. It has worked, it has delivered. And it's recently when those systems seem to be breaking down a little bit that people are realizing that there are things that we need to do. And so that is what has sort of brought people to our organizations, is this realization that there are people out there doing this kind of work year in and year out. The Brennan Center is having our 30th anniversary last year. We have been screaming into the wind on these issues for a long, long time. And so it's been really nice to see folks from all, sectors, backgrounds, walks of life, coming to the same realization that we've been fighting for. And so a big part of that is education, helping our donors understand what's happening, where, why it's happening, what can be done about it, what we are doing about it, but also being a bridge to help them learn about the movement and to help them understand who does what and what other sort of pillars of the community that they should be supporting based on their own personal passions and philanthropic interests. And so being able to connect donors with other organizations or to engage in collaborative fundraising with close partners who are working on shared visions and goals has been, I think, really exciting and something that I think that I would love to keep going and grow even stronger, no matter who wins the election, because our democracy is going to need a lot of protection, no matter who wins.
I love the description of this fundraising in this kind of moment as movement building, and I think you're both highlighting that our media headline attention is very short. That moment when the dollars rain in can be really condensed, but the need, the expense, the expanded work, the expanded impact is very long, and a lot of organizations really miss this opportunity to really let go of that limiting belief of one-time donors, crisis-only donors, disaster-only donors, whatever that is, and really think of these people who have raised their hands to say, I'm interested in the kind of world you hope for, the kind of world you're building, and to really engage people in that community. So much, David and I share a background at the American Red Cross, and so much of what we learn in disaster fundraising is that first gift isn't to your organization. It's through you to the people and work that you're serving. It's the second or third gift that's to you. So how quickly can you thank, can you engage, and can you ask again to really create that momentum and movement? I think that's the big question that organizations that are anticipating really being thrown even more into the eye of the divisive moment in the coming months need to be thinking about. Switching over to Michael and David, our food bank friends. Both of your organizations are addressing day-to-day needs in your communities. What does leading through a divisive moment look like for your organizations? Maybe we'll start with David because we haven't heard from you yet.
Thank you. So I mentioned earlier that it's not really about hunger, it's about income. And, the strategy of just distributing food from the food banking world, um, it's not as effective as it used to be. And one of the strategies that we are attempting to embrace at the food bank, and the Houston Food Bank, by the way, is the largest food bank in the country when it comes to distribution of food. We, in the past year, through the help of 93,000 volunteers serving 18 Southeast Texas counties, distributed 140 million nutritious meals. And so the strategy is we want to be a mover into the next generation of food banks. And we're adopting a platform that we hope will lift our neighbors, our community partners, all those that we work with towards personal achievement and sustainability. And in that way, long term, those families that are struggling to get by, they won't need food assistance in the future, and they won't need as much assistance from other nonprofits. And so we're really trying to create this hub, if you will, or a facility in which we're convening effective partners around healthcare, education, workforce development, legal aid, social services, and wellness, all under one roof so that families can more holistically and comprehensively receive the services they need all in one place versus having to go to all those different individual locations and to get those various services. And as a result, that shared space, we believe, will help to facilitate greater collaboration amongst other nonprofits within communities. It will improve as far as the volunteering service experience that people have who are wanting to give and serve. It will help those in particular neighborhoods that are struggling to get by to feel better about their neighborhood and their community. And it will also really help donors to feel like their dollars they're giving are truly making an impact. And so that's the approach we're taking at the Houston Food Bank. And I think from a fundraising and general nonprofit perspective, I think the need for greater collaboration amongst nonprofits working together, that's really the wave of the future.
Oh, David, thank you. And I really appreciate your reflection on kind of our food banking world. And I was thinking about the geography of our world to kind of get into this from my space. I didn't say this earlier. In my own kind of race, ethnicity, lineage, I'm Hispanic from my dad's side. That's why I carry that wonderful surname Guerra, Miguel Guerra, and Irish and German on my mother's side. And much like many people in Texas, we're very mixed that way, intermarrying between kind of the Hispanic community and then folks who have immigrated from other parts of the United States. And I certainly carry that. We face that a lot today in our space in South Texas when it comes to this moment and this divisive moment on something like immigration and refugee work. It shows up in San Antonio and South Texas on a daily basis. And for us as fundraisers, it's not unheard of to get that call of saying from a donor who might be more conservative, like, look, I want to send you some money, but I want to know, and I will say this with sensitivity, but this would be a quote. I want to know if any of my dollars going to support those illegals getting food from you. And so we've trained the staff to think about, well, how do we respond to that in with the right language, with the right tone. And luckily, we have so many donors that care about marginalized populations, refugee populations, immigrant populations, and such. That's where they want their money to go first. And so we can tell a donor that we can put your money elsewhere to a child or to a senior, because there are actually other people who have taken care of those populations. And it always surprises them. They're like taken aback, like they thought they were going to get us into a little bit of a fight or something. But to be thoughtful ahead of time and to train our team in that has been really, really important to do. I think secondarily, I'm inspired by our nonprofit leaders who take this moment, Bianca, and lead through advocacy. That it is a combination of our own unique work as nonprofits in our sector, where it happens to be, but raising voice. In my specific world, we tell the community we need four things: food, time, volunteerism, philanthropy, and voice. And that voice is just raising and amplifying and understanding, and that our work is really about building communities of conscience. It's not alone doing the service of whatever work it is, but we have a responsibility, I think, to do that. And we hear from our donors about that sometimes, and I think it's that unique balance to love them and to have maybe a challenging conversation, to understand where they're coming from, and to help them to see from our perspective perhaps a world that they don't see or experience. I think the other part of this, and it's a good question of what's this kind of leading look like in this divisive moment. As fundraisers, we're also, we do direct mail, we do direct marketing work. We're doing, a lot of mass marketing for fundraising. And so how we think about raising money for the neighbors and with the neighbors that we serve, or food. So using dignifying language, right? Inclusive language. We spend a lot of time just making sure that we're not being patronizing, that we're being inclusive, and not having an us, them kind of thinking when it comes to how we're speaking about that. But really the interconnectedness and the interwovenness of all of us, and trying to use that in that way. And then lastly, I think this leadership in this time looks like just going within a little bit. One of my teachers says the way out is in. And I stay with that a lot, that to find a way out of these situations, we're going to have to spend time inside. And so, we've had a lot of training and teaching on emotional intelligence in the last years, but I think there's a level of kind of spiritual and interconnected intelligence, mindful intelligence that we all need, that will allow us to strengthen our leadership roles and to be better listeners, to be deeper listeners when it comes to these complex problems.
It's a good segue back to you, David. I think most of the fundraisers I talk with say, I didn't think that I was operating in a political space, but suddenly, whatever cause area I'm in, whether it's a museum or a food bank or an animal shelter, is suddenly feeling political. And these conversations with donors are getting more fraught. And how do I navigate not offending someone, but wanting to reach out? And I've been really inspired that fundraisers are really excited to lean in and use their relationships and their connections and their listening skills to be those bridge builders. How do you think about that as you're having conversations with philanthropists in your community?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the trends that we have been seeing across the board, not just with the food bank network, but also in the nonprofit sector, and I alluded to this at the beginning, that fundraising is getting a bit more challenging. Part of the reason is what you just alluded to. But what we're seeing, the most recent studies and trends We're seeing a drop in the number of people who are giving. However, those that are giving have increased their giving. And I think the other thing that is really evident is the trend towards giving where they feel the greatest impact is going to be felt and experienced is really paramount now in deciding who they give to. And so donors are more and more becoming much more selective. They are typically tending to steer towards a smaller circle of those who they will support. And one of the things I'm very proud that the food bank in Houston is doing is we have really been spending a lot of time on developing community advisory groups. In fact, there was one meeting this morning, and this is made up of various partner organizations. It's neighborhood community leaders, um, people of faith, all coming together. And it's an opportunity for us to hear from them. What are their concerns in their communities? What are they experiencing? Where, with this being a very divisive time with the election season, there's a lot of misconceptions or even half-truths or things they're hearing. And it's an opportunity, Michael was sharing about being a good listener. It's an opportunity for us just to really let them be heard. And what we have seen, taking what we're learning from the community has really helped us to enhance our fundraising, because we can then go back to those donors who may have questions or reservations about giving and why they should give now. And we can share those stories of the personal stories that are being shared from people who live in the communities that need our support. And so community groups, that's really big. Working closely also with at all levels, the government, so federal, state, county, and city. That has been an area where just making sure that we are in step in communication wise, and we know what our government leaders are doing, what they're saying, what they're committing to or wanting to do, and how that impacts our communities, and being able to channel that and take that back to those community advisory groups. That also plays into all of this. So that is one of the ways we're dealing with it, and it's really being effective.
Thanks. And Michael, how would you build on that? And specifically, for the fundraisers who are listening, who are looking for some tips and tricks about what they can do proactively to build understanding and empathy and connection through their relationships or their storytelling, what advice do you have?
Well, I was reflecting on that as David was talking. I think if we look deeply at our own stories, and I'll say this at least for myself, I don't want to generalize too much, but I do believe that if we could generalize it, that in the narrative of our own stories, no matter our age, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, any of that, just as humans, in the narrative of our story, that so many of those ingredients are the same. I was thinking about stuff that you don't want people to see, maybe the shadow side, maybe, in my own case, um, struggles with addiction in earlier times. If I can allow and be settled with that and not let it just be pushed away, it allows me to understand, others who might suffer from addiction in a way that um, if I hadn't really gone deep and embraced and thought about and understood it and loved that part of me that might have been broken at one time, but I might not have the empathy for others who are experiencing that now. So I think there's really staying and looking deeply at our own narrative, and I hope that makes sense. I think allows in a level of interconnectedness and empathy, because we're all very much the same. We're one step from being where that other person might be, or maybe we've actually been there and we're not there now. We might not look it on the outside, but on the inside, we're probably very close to that. And so I think for fundraisers, just taking time to be self-reflective in that way will go a long way. And then you kind of couple that with then the ability to kind of listen and to be in community, to not be again outside of any community that you're working within. I think is just super critical. When I was working in other circles, it was often encouraged that you spend at least a day a week in a kind of outside your desk, but in community in a different way, where you're not just breaking bread, but making bread along and next to those who you would seem to be serving, quote unquote. And we find that actually we're all serving each other if we really do it right.
So Jamie and John, as you've been listening to these two talk, what's coming to mind for you in terms of practical tips for fundraisers on how to navigate these difficult conversations or proactively tell stories and build understanding? Anything you'd like to add? And if you are in our audience and want to lob in a question, I'm going to move there in just a moment. You can use the Q&A tool.
I'm not sure that I have specific tips to share, but I do really want to thank Michael for what he just contributed. I think that is really important. The work that we do at the Brennan Center is more at the systemic level. So it can actually be kind of difficult to be in community with the people that we are trying to support day in and day out. One way that we have found an ability to do that is to focus on the narrower subset of people who are working to support those communities. And so for us, that looks like election officials is a big group that we support with in a variety of ways. And I think one of the things that we've done that's been very successful is to pull together folks who are representing voters in similar types of places, but across the country. So one area we focus on is big cities. It turns out that the election officials in the big cities have more in common with folks from out of state than they do sometimes with the folks who are in their own state because of the nature of their communities. And so, that story has been really moving to people, finding those examples of where your organization is really pulling people together and sort of spinning gold out of the hay is, I think, really, really useful for fundraising. It motivates donors and it convinces them that your work is making a difference. So that's something that I would add.
I love that, John, and I will just add in, relatedly, I find that in our storytelling, the best way to make an impact is to focus on the shared values. So, Michael, again, I love your story about breaking bread with those you serve. Um, Again, from a systemic level, like John is working at, for our work, we do tend to focus on like how can like we all believe in similar core tenets, right? And that's where our messaging and our storytelling is focusing around. So find those shared values, lean into them, don't be afraid of them, and put that front and center, because when we all know where we agree and where we're common and where we stand together, it's just I find a lot of conversation with donors, partners, community members, it just makes it a lot easier. And so that's my advice to everyone.
Thanks. I'm going to move us to a really interesting audience question here. Uh, can you talk about the difference in navigating a divisive political climate with different stakeholders? So how does an approach to an individual differ from how you're talking with, say, a private foundation or a company or a government funder? Anyone have a reflection on that one? Maybe what's the same, what's different?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. And my initial thoughts were, out of these group of stakeholders mentioned, individual donors are the first movers and shakers. From my experience, I've found that family or foundations tend to be pretty resistant to political headwinds, so to speak, depending on their mission, of course. And I feel the same way about corporate giving and government giving does change with the political climate, but that's usually more budgetary than anything else. So I think individual givers are the ones to pay most attention to when it comes to this. And I think, again, a few things like individuals tend to give more to elections. So that's part of why the shift can happen, especially during a politically divisive time. But I think in these conversations with individual donors, it's best to connect with them and see, do your values align, to get what I said earlier, and making sure those values are the same. If they do align and you can find that connection, I found with individual donors, if your hearts are in the same place, you can really go far. Um, and so I think it's finding those connections in a way that feels authentic to both your mission and to the donor's philanthropic interests. So that's my quick take, but I'm happy to hear any others from the group.
Go
Yeah,
ahead, Michael.
thank you, Jamie. No, just I had one thought about those. They're so diverse. Those groups. It's just maybe starting from that place of asking, of being curious. I was thinking of my favorite Ted Lasso episode. If any of y'all loved Ted Lasso like I did, looking forward to the next season. But there's a great scene where he's with in a bar and kind of play some darts, and it's all about somebody not really understanding who he was, and because that person wasn't curious about learning who Ted was as a person. And I think just taking the time to stop and listen and ask, and to learn, and just to ask that question of how do you see this? How would you approach that? How do you think about this? And if we can start from just kind of asking and listening and learning, I think then we know how to navigate, if you would, the communication therefrom. But if we go from some assumption or what we might think, or from not even asking ahead of time, it might put us in a detriment when it comes to the conversation.
I love that. And, I think it's always good to remember that institutions are people too, right? A company isn't the thing that makes decisions on its own, right? It's people who we're talking to, and that relational piece is always the place to start. So speaking of, maybe John, you can start with this one, and maybe David, you can chime in. Someone's asking, as a development professional who's not allowed to, quote unquote, be political or share political opinions or support a candidate, what's the best way to steer a conversation that's going that way back to core values or the organization or the work? Kind of how do you handle when someone's sort of taking you down a road that you can't or don't want to go down? What do you think, John? You got an easy question. Sorry.
Yeah, it definitely happens, especially, when the work can be so sort of linked in people's minds with what's happening in the political sphere. I will say that I think in these circumstances, focusing on the key sort of needs of access and opportunity are how you can speak to people who have different opinions about maybe other elements of the work. And so, for us, if someone were to come in and have really strong opinions about sort of who should be voting or why and who they should be voting for, I think bringing it back to the need for open, equal access to voting and to democracy as an undeniable good for our society is how we can reach those people, making sure that they may have their own goals that they're welcome to have in their giving, but making clear that we are not looking to secure any particular outcome, and that what we really want is for the system to be open to everyone and for them to understand how it works, to understand that it is secure, and that it can deliver results that people can trust and believe in. And so that's been a way that I think we can kind of step aside from the more fraught political conversations and bring it back to what our democracy is, which is really sort of the operating system for our country. And I think everyone should agree that that it should work.
And I would
David,
just,
what about you?
yeah, I would just add, it's all about the storytelling and steering the donor back to really the heart of the need. I think it's easy to get caught up in, and very tempting as a fundraiser to get involved in those kind of conversations with, the political scene. But I think from a perspective of even whether it's hunger, whether it's disasters, or any really charitable cause, that crosses all boundaries. It doesn't matter your political views, your religious views. It doesn't matter. The need is there. And I think for me, what's always been effective is to continually steer the conversation back to uh, here's why we really are having this conversation to start with. What can you do to help us impact these needs for good? And I think that's the key, is just continually striving to steer people back towards the heart of the matter of why are we doing this to start with.
Thanks. And I think that there is this opportunity for us to all fundraisers look each other in the eye and also acknowledge that sometimes these conversations are personally upsetting or frustrating or alarming. And the way that we feel in those moments is completely legitimate and valid. And I think so much of leadership, someone told me once, is about becoming aware of how you feel so that you can respond instead of react. But I do think it's a good moment for us to acknowledge that being a fundraiser feels scary and icky and frustrating and alarming, and does take a lot of courage, always, but especially in this moment. And how can we care for ourselves so that we can lead in that responsive manner that you mentioned, and take care of ourselves as well. So I would like to talk to you all for hours and hours more, but we have 3 minutes left. So I'd love to hear a parting thought from all of you, sentence or two. What's the biggest takeaway you want to leave us with? John?
I would say that, I think we've spent this conversation talking about navigating division, and that to a lot of people, that means sort of mitigating risk, avoiding difficult conversations, not saying things that other people might take issue with, and I think that there's a lot of room for actually leaning into the division as a way of learning more about people and where they're coming from and why they feel the way that they do. And I think if you deploy some of the tactics that Michael shared earlier, you can find a way to actually to bridge that gap and to get closer to someone by leaning into that division. I've seen it, in my personal life, in my professional life, and so I think that is something that we all should try to do more of.
Thanks. JB and then David?
Well, I just want to share a message of hope. We are nonprofit leaders. We are changing the face of this country, in some cases, the face of this world. We should lean into the leadership moment right now and be proud of it. And I hope all of us here see ourselves as that movement builder, and we're part of something big. And it's really exciting, and glad to be in this work with all of you.
I think the biggest thing takeaway for me is it's so much about collaboration. It's so much about working together and finding those areas where we can bridge our differences. We can come together because there is a deeper uh, need. There is a deeper cause that is fundamental as human beings of who we are and caring for others and being able to look beyond the differences. I'm really excited about the future for nonprofits because I firmly believe that the old saying, it takes a village. I think the whole collaborative effort, working together, will make us all more effective in addressing and eventually solving a lot of the needs and the challenges that we have right now.
All right, Michael, you get the last word.
Bring it home, and I'll do it. I realize we're at time. Everybody, I'm in Asheville, North Carolina today, and just one of the most beautiful places in our country, and just supporting some of their disaster recovery work with the food banking in the community. And if you'll look at some of the research around what is it that helps communities, cities respond well after a natural disaster, it's not the physical infrastructure of that community, it's the social infrastructure. And so the better we do our work as nonprofits in establishing strong social structures in our communities, the better and more resilient our communities will be to weather the storms, whatever they might be, natural, political, you name it.
Oh, well said, everybody. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you to our audience and for all the great questions. Michelle will be following up with more information, including a link to the recording. And we hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you for all you're doing to lead our communities through this moment. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.